Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of The Insider, brought to you, as ever, by Vanishing Inc. My guest today, we've just been discussing this, could be classed as an underground legend, but if you say underground, then you're not really underground. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Chris Power. Chris, how are you this morning?
I'm fine, thank you, Damien. Just starting a slow start today for me. Usually I'm up very early, but I've thought I'd give myself the morning off just to sort of get in the zone, so to speak, to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having a relaxing morning to warm up. The show's 30 minutes. There's no time for pleasantries. What's your origin story? You have 38 seconds.
Blimey, 38 seconds. Well, I'm an amateur magician, never been professional. I've had a part-time kind of approach to it, but it's kind of affected my life, greatly, just by meeting lots of nice people over the years through conventions. And the main part of my professional work is I was head of the audiovisual department in the British Museum, which is in Bloomsbury. So that was conferences, presentations. I started life as a projectionist, really, in that world, and that brought my bread and butter home, and I could indulge in other things.
Fair enough. And one of the other things you indulged in was getting that Di Vernon bloke to see your magic, and he said, when he does something, he puts me in the mind of Leipzig, Mellini, or Daly. You can't see a thing. His magic is masterful. That's nice, isn't it? When did you meet him, and what did you show him?
It was, I think it would have been about 1988, and I was just doing my act as was then, which is kind of the same things I'm always doing, or I'm just trying to improve upon certain things. It takes a long time, so my signature things, I suppose, are kind of card under box. I should say that I learnt most of my magic before I really met magicians. I was reading some books of working in pubs and bars, so you've got a ready-made sense of relaxation. So when you first go out into the Magic Castle close-up room, especially when you know that you're going to meet someone like Vernon. In fact, I heard him before I could actually see him, because he came into the castle and I could hear him before he got to the room. So it was quite, quite a moment, because 6 years before I'd been reading expert card technique and reading the stories in there. So for him, I think he was just being kind to me, encouraging. But yeah, no, we did. He's a nice guy. I found him a very nice man.
He famously said that every person starting in magic should pick one trick and make it an identifying trick with them. Do you think you deliberately did that with Coins Through Silk?
Not really, but I remember the first time I saw the effect, which was in 1982 at a FISM in Switzerland, Lausanne, and Michael Amar was performing it, and he came joint first with the name escapes me now, but name's escaping me as I'm getting older. But basically, I saw it from a distance. Literally, I wasn't even in the room, but I said, wow, that's visually very nice. And I was trying to sort of think of things, especially with coins at that time, it's very hard to find coin material unless you're a real coin specialist. But you could actually stand up, as I usually work, and it's quite visible. But I remember thinking, when I looked at it, I remember going back to England, and I used to perform it, because all I had at the time was an opaque silk, just to sort of work out some of the moves. And the thing that occurred to me, I was always trying to sort of, kill the suspicion of an audience is like one of the things I'm sort of trying to do. So you lead them in slowly. In the original routine, I mean, it's great whatever, because it's such a visual trick. It's great. But you were showing the coins, and then you're putting them back in and showing the coins. Now, there may have been technical reasons. And I thought, well, if it's transparent and you can see them all the time anyway, why do you take them out at all? They should always appear to be in there. So that was the key thought. And then I just started doing it, changed the pattern, and it's been one of the it's become a signature piece really, because it's not cards, and along with the sort of the presentation of it, the kind of performance, which intrigues me a lot now. I was very focused on magic for the first sort of 5 or 6 years, practice, and then I slowly realised, the key to a lot of this stuff is the actual performing. So now I find great pleasure in thinking of slightly different approaches to routines, and I'm finding I have a little bit more time now. So I hope one day when we spring out of lockdown and what's going on, we won't completely, but I look forward to meeting people and lecturing and doing things, because it's a sort of what shall I say? This virtual podcast is very good. You can talk and things come across, ideas, but you can't really. You can teach to a certain degree over the medium, and I have for sort of certain select people who've sort of winkled me out of my shell somewhere, but it's no substitute for an actual real room and real people.
Yeah.
Just like life, you can't live life just by looking at a computer monitor, and you can't,
Sure. Do you think you're done with the trick now, or are you still tinkering with it?
People come up to me, or have come up to me in the past, saying, "I've thought of this. Why don't you use this? And you could do this." And really, I spent such a long time in the beginning. I don't use any gimmick coins, so they have to be real, because people have got to be able to touch them and see them, and there are some very clever things people have come up with, and they're not quite for me, because there's a certain purity. It's one of those rare effects for me that has some kind of built-in. It's like pure is the only word I can really say. On the surface, the effect, the perception appears pure. What's going on underneath? It's like always. There's lots of stuff with magic, but
Sure.
and I found, I remember when I first started, I experimented playing with sponge balls, all the usual things people do, and as I defined my character and my performance, I found that was getting, because it's on people's hands and they're acting as a proxy for an audience. It just came across, and certainly in the few. I've just experimented with downloading a video that I used to have on a stream, which was a performance on a video that I did with my colleague JJ, and it's to real people, and it's interesting to see the reaction of the people, and the Coins Through Silk has become that kind of thing, and I don't think I'll ever stop tinkering, because I'm always looking, but really I think I would focus in on the pattern, the presentation, more than sort of changing the techniques now. I think it's it has evolved since the beginning. I was very interested to watch a very early competition performance where I did Coins Through Silk, and I finished it in about 1 minute 15 seconds, and I couldn't believe it. I was looking at it. There was no real pattern. I just got through it. So I thought, no, I'll make this. I'll use this, like everything I do, to expand and fill the space, because I don't want to do just one trick after another. Which is why now I'm kind of rubbish at, like, if someone says, "Can you do a trick, like just a quick trick, 15 seconds?" I mean, I'd just vanish a coin or do something simple like that, because when people see it, the effect is astonishing. I remember when I first saw a magician, and just to vanish, it seemed like a special effect to me. And I've always, and if you can always remember that first thing and get that same feeling, then you've cracked part of the puzzle in being able to. You just think to yourself, I remember when I first saw this, because we take it for granted, especially after such a long time. We just you don't, if I do perform live, you get all sorts of reactions, but in a more formal situation, you don't want I find with magic, you don't get an instant reaction, because you've got to give the audience time to breathe, to give them permission to sort of react, because they should be sort of engrossed in that world of what you're putting across. And then so little cues like just standing back and saying, well, you know, that's what I do. What do you do? That kind of thing.
No, I think that's really important. That permission to react that you just said is yeah, very important. Let's talk about Opus. And for any younger listeners, Opus was a British magazine that you ran with aforementioned JJ and Ian Keeble and Britland. Now, in my research for this interview, I found this fantastic quote on the Magic Cafe concerning Opus magazine. You ready? Really dull and written by amateurs in the worst sense of the word, who cannot form an opinion, so prattle on mindlessly in a pseudo-intellectual fashion. Definitely not worth getting. Typical Magic Cafe insights there.
And he was
Now,
one of our best.
it,
He was one of our best subscribers as well. I don't know what happened to the man.
As I understand it, at the start of it, you were all a bit miffed that every Magic magazine was so gushy and glowing about everything, and their reliance on advertising dollars meant they never sort of slated anything, and you wanted to do a magazine with editorial independence and blunt reviews and honesty. How did it start, and what were those early days like?
Well, the early days, it has to be sort of a generational thing, I suppose, in a way. It's like we did get together in a group and said Ian wanted to do some writing for the first year, and he was very disciplined and got it all. David Britland was, you know, always a good backstop to go to if you want to ask a question about anything and sort of verify. He's the man to go to. And JJ was out there working sometimes for International Magic. It was street performing. He was doing all sorts of things. So there was a sort of broad. I wanted to do some illustrations. You know, I'd been to art college at the beginning of my career, but I always look now. I always look at really Opus as being more of a fanzine rather than a. You know, we called it a magazine and it was grand, but it changed slightly. And I was experimenting. We were always up against deadlines, and as you know, any kind of deadline, and that's why it became a little bit irregular. But the reaction from everybody except the person who gave that quote, I think we might have even made that quote up ourselves and sort of put it up somewhere. You know, that's the kind of clever marketing tactic we used. You know, and so by the end, there were 5 volumes published, 60 issues, so that should be 5 years, but it took about 20 years. However, we got to meet so many interesting people on our travels, and just like the magic, for me, it enabled me, and still does to a degree, when we're allowed to go anywhere in the world with a few coins, a silk, and some cards in my pocket, very easy to pack. And I've been all over, you know, a lot of different places, different continents, just because of that. So if you turned up in a city somewhere, you'd always find a magic club. So you literally, it's one of those things. And then the majority of my friends I have now have all come via magic. I mean, it's incredible. You know, that's enabled me a great deal. And Opus was the same, except it was a slightly different approach, and there was an appetite for people at that time. But it's an awful lot of work when you know, and now I've often, you know, and I've talked to JJ and other people now. I obviously wouldn't do it in exactly the same way, but as you can see, like I've got some books scattered about. My house is, every room's got books. I love books, and I'm a collector, you know, I like the book as an object, something you can handle. A beautifully produced book or design book or bound book or the design. I'm always fascinated by that. And that was my sort of first, even before magic, that was my first sort of thing. You know, I was always the kid in the class that could draw pretty well, not the best, but you know, pretty good. And then I could see things, the juxtaposition between images and stuff. So that's what I was playing with. That was my reason, and I was very happy to also come up with the name through various things, because I remember going to a meeting once, you know, we're about to start, and he said, well, I'll think of a name, because the name's important, and it should be, you know, just very simple, and go through. And I came back and I said, okay, and there's this table, there's David Britland there, JJ, a few other people spotted around, my friend Shiv Dougal, who is he is that kind of underground magician that we talk about,
Yeah.
although he is out there, so he's not even technically underground, but we like to call him an underground magician. And I said to everybody with bated breath, it's like approaching a performance, I said, okay, I've decided, here's some sketches, here's some concepts for the things, here's Diverne and Larry Jennings, here's an illustration, it'll look kind of like this. The production values will be, you know, I was pasting up stuff then and just photocopying it, all sorts of experimental
Physically
things.
cutting out.
Yeah, physically cutting out things. It wasn't until the sort of end of kind of volume 2 era, as we got into volume 3, that it became, I started using PageMaker. But it was still very much a big desk with loads of bits on. And when I was putting some of it together at work, I'd be taking what you can do so easily now. It's like music, where the tools are so easy now to use in some senses. However, you know, getting a graphic design program doesn't make you a graphic designer. You know, you can overuse it. However, you know, in those days, I would take, you know, the Opus logo itself, I would take an indelible marker and I would write it very small, and I'd let it bleed out on cartridge paper. And then I used to go to our photocopier in the museum, and I just used to blow it up and see what it looked like. You know, it's a bit like a spray can. So it's that kind of experimentation I was talking about. So that in itself gave me, you know, the magazine enabled me to make even more contacts. And, you know, I met so many people, Albert Goshman, Channing Pollock. I mean, the list goes on. You know, we touched them at some point, and everybody seemed to like it. And Vernon, Billy McComb was the one who was feeding Vernon the Opus magazine. He's saying, oh, I like this magazine, it's great. Oh, yeah, I like that. Because there was generally, I suppose, at that time, part of the audience reading it, there was a kind of rebelliousness about it, of trying to be controversial. But, of course, what happens is, you know, if you've got nothing nice to say about someone, I usually say, well, don't say anything, because we had some scrapes over the years by sort of trying to tell what we thought of the truth. It's thought of as nothing with, you know, the press and the media now, but you can see, well, you can't please everybody, all of you know, obviously, and then once you get the realization, because you try very hard, you just go, well, I'm not going to please everybody. You know, some people don't like what I do or don't enjoy something. I mean, it's more to do with them in a sense, because it's not magic or conjuring and this kind of thing. It's very subjective. You can't have a top 10, but we all have different. It's like Desert Island Discs, going on that and choosing your favourite bits of music. You know, that's a game I've played, but it's changed over the years. You sort of, you know, how can you judge someone like Di Vernon with Tamariz, or David Williamson with Ascanio, or all of these, or Danny Dortez with, you know, you can't, because they're all individuals that have brought all their life experiences to things. And, you know, that's what I find fascinating personally. That kind of, someone said to me, and I've a couple of times people have asked, who was your main inspirations? Who did you most want to be like? And I've met lots of people. Nothing that I've done has come out of nothing. I didn't just come out, although I joke, oh, well, I found that it's in Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft, actually, if you look carefully, you know, or Greater Magic or something. But you just get all this information around you, put it in. And I said, well, to be honest, I've met a great deal of very, very good magicians and very interesting people. You know, Jim Steinmeier, and, you know, I have fascinating conversations with him and all sorts of people. However, to these people, the answer I would give is, well, actually, although I've been inspired and influenced and everything by all these people, I always just wanted to be Chris Power, because that's, to me, that is the key. You just, Goshman said, who became a friend. It's like he said, the magic is you, and that's kind of the essence of the great film stars or theatre stars or musicians. It's like it's got to come via that person. They're the people that make it. And in my own very tiny way, in a very tiny branch of this world, that's quite nice to have achieved. Even a small part.
For sure. Scanned PDFs of the magazines used to be available, and the site was taken down that was selling them. Have you got any plans to do anything with that history?
I have puzzled over this. As I say, I like the real book. The scans of Opus, actually, if you go to the Conjuring Arts website, if you're a member of that, they're available there. And also, I believe, maybe on library.com, you can search them out. And I'm not sure. We did at a time start to play with, when I was seeing JJ a lot. He's now sort of retired in Portugal, but he's got an interest in these things. But, there comes a time when the practicality of doing things, it just involves work, and we're all trying to. I'm not a professional magician, so we're all trying to get through this and make a living somehow, or scrape a bit of a living. There are bills to pay. However, I would say that just like I'm starting to look at, getting a bit more into magic, and sort of pushing my wares and doing things, Opus is obviously a great resource, and
Sure.
I look at it now and I go, oh, some of the illustrations are rubbish. I remember doing that. I was in a rush to get off to a place, and it's interesting. So I'm sort of annotating things, and there will hopefully be news next year of a republished version. That at the moment I'm not at liberty to say exactly who might be doing this, but it's definitely a big thing, and I'm thinking, it'd be wasted if it wasn't there. And it would be, one of the plans is to talk to some of the people that are around that can look back. David Williamson would be a good example in a sense, because I've known him for about, I knew him when he was nothing. No, but it's funny, actually. David Williamson is a good point, because on the first copy of his book, Williamson's Wonders, on the back, Richard Kaufman put a column that JJ had written for Opus of when we met David Williamson, and the top of it is like, who is David Williamson? I mean, now you couldn't even understand the concept. It's a bit like saying, who is Buster Keaton for the olden time? Or now it would be, who is, or what is Downton Abbey? What is that? It's you can't conceive. And yet everybody has that thing where they're always in the background until they're not.
Sure.
And that kind of partly self-promotion, partly is, but, for David's particular thing, it's like a supreme skill, and the way he thinks in the whole, he's kind of, he's one of the rare people that has got that. He's got a lot of the different things that go into it, but it wasn't without a lot of hard work and a lot of failure and a lot of this and successes. And, he, I remember talking to him once, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying, he's saying, well, at one point, I was just doing too many conventions and things, and everybody wanted me to be the clown,
Yeah.
And now he's run off to the circus and doing, When I first saw that, I thought, well, where is he in it? Is he? And then I saw the great Ringmaster picture, and he's grown, and he's fantastic in certain things. And there are other people that are good. Pick your arena, however modest, and just do that. Be happy with that.
Now, I couldn't find out whether it was you or International that kind of brought him to the UK initially, because for younger viewers, Opus also ran some very well respected conventions where Williamson was. Do you remember whether it was you or International that got him over first?
It was international because JJ, who was a very good friend of Ron McMillan, he said, we saw David in Osnabrück, or I can't recall the exact actual place. And he was doing a lecture, and we were there. And I remember going back to JJ, so you've got to see this guy, because on the trip there we were going. Apparently, there's some American guy who's got kind of coins sewn into his jacket that he taps and everything. He's meant to be very good. And then, of course, we sought him out and saw him, and it was just like being a kind of layperson again, because the facility that he had, and of course, having the coins sewn in is what people were perceiving. Magicians were perceiving, and so he's fantastic. So, and he said to Ron McMillan, that is, said, you've got to book him in London for your convention, and that began. He was already doing stuff in America, and he was starting to do things in Europe, but that was one of the moments that actually brought him into a bigger arena still. And he had a unique talent, and it's like everybody goes through certain phases where they get influenced, these days for card magicians, or certainly at one point, Guy Hollingworth was, he wrote a book. And, for me, one of the things I say is that if you haven't written a book, then, that to me is the mark of what you are. Not hundreds of books, different things you contribute, but when you've distilled it of where your journey has been and what you do, then that kind of validates some of it, And due to my extreme laziness and just not able to keep I've got 100 different notes, and they're all on backs of envelopes. But some people are saying you've got to put something down, and I say, well, I don't really know. I do the same kind of stuff, but it's the people. I would, if I were to do a book, it would be more like a commonplace book. It would be full of interesting things of people. The people I've met are more interesting to me than what I've done. Yeah, it's but as examples to point out their different bits of wisdom and things of what they've done.
Right.
John Carney is a great writer. I mean, he's one of the best sleight of hand magicians in the world, in my opinion. And one of the best thinkers. But there are lots of people now that I don't know. And I'm thinking, well, there's a whole new set of people now. So I kind of am happy to sort of settle into that almost elder statesman kind of thing. Although I'm not that old, but I knew at the Magic Circle when I was waiting to see Guy. I think I'd gone down to the Magic Circle, and this guy, a young guy, came up, and I could see him. I was just looking at the magic posters, and he said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I just sit down here?" And I said, no, please help yourself. And then I was looking at the posting, and he said, "Excuse me, are you Chris Power?" And that second I went, oh my God, I've become all the people that I used to ask. And I think, oh God. And in an instant, I thought of all the time that had gone, because I used to ask Fred Robinson and Eric Mason and people like that. And, they were my sort of first real influences, because there was a bar just opposite the old Magic Circle when it was in Cheney's Mews. Not Cheney's Mews, no, was it? No, it was Cheney's Mews, yeah. So, sorry, I remember right? The Marlborough Arms, was... Yeah. I saw so many good magicians there. Ricky Jay, Barry Richardson. I mean, just there were so many people, and it was like a little gathering spot. You could always guarantee you'd see someone passing through. They would always make a beeline for the Marlborough Arms. So I saw a lot of great magic and met a lot of very interesting people.
Who are some, talking of magic books, what are some magic books that you think every serious student should read?
Well, I can only go by what I've read. The Amateur Magician's Handbook by Henry Hay is certainly it's like films you'd re-watch, because there's more. Every time you read it, there's more. And the first book I ever got was Expert of the Card Table. No, not Expert Card Technique. I always get mixed up. Yeah.
That was your first book?
That was my first book. But
that's quite a tough.
Yeah. But also I got, because I knew when I got it, I knew that I wouldn't be able to sort of. It seemed like a physics textbook to me from school. And I thought, I need something. And I also bought a copy at the same time of Harry Barron's Card Tricks for Beginners or something like that, which is up on my shelf. I got a nice first hardback edition of it. So between those two books, and the thing about Expert Card Technique is it's full of stories, and it's written in such a wonderful language, and the story behind the book. And, I remember talking to Gordon Bruce and many other people, the stories behind that book, who's credited, who's not, what really happened with Hugh Gard. And I mean, there are people who know those stories so much better than me, but for me, I was just obsessed with that book. My original copy is just like the binding fell apart. It's like now the covers come off now, and I can read the pages, but I don't throw it away because I've got better copies to read now, and also on the internet you've got access to it. So that and some of Tamara's books, they're Paula Paul. I mean, I'm putting some because I've just sort of started experimenting with Instagram, which I don't find particularly intuitive. However, I've got a few followers now, and like I say, through Gumroad, which kind of seems to be, some people were telling me, I mean, forgive me, but you're familiar with the Gumroad thing and everything. And then the first lecture I've put on Gumroad, the before the FISM Madrid, so that's on there. And now I've got permission from Martin Macmillan and a few other people, and I'm working on a project where there is one other performance which was for International Magic, where I did a lecture, and so I'm just working now with a very guy called Tim Brand, who's a fantastic audio kind of, he's cleaned it up, and with his friends, people that I know, they've kind of cleaned it up. They're doing me a favour, and what I'm doing is I'm putting a director's commentary on it and looking at myself, so you can watch it raw, and then you can watch it with me commenting on my younger self doing stuff. Because if you can bear it, it's always very difficult for us to look at ourselves, and it's very uncomfortable. I'd recommend it to performers to look at yourself, especially if you had some longevity, to actually see what you were doing, because then you see it's like I was mentioning about Coins Through Silk. When I first started doing it, it was over very quickly, and you go, oh, what I was trying to do here, you'll say, is I was trying to do this. And you can see already the way I'm looking around, because I was very interested at that time in kind of the power of the gaze, of how you control people's eyes and how you, and so on and so forth. And I find that, which I did a little bit on Rough Cut, but on this, it's a very, you can explain to people, So imagine if you'd had a video now of Leipzig or Daly talking about what he was doing, saying, oh, I remember that, that was in a bar, that was just around the corner in Chicago from, and you're going, wow, really? So we know now that he was in Chicago filming, he's doing that.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing. And I'm hoping that'll be up on Gumroad by the end of March, and in that I do another routine called Your Card, My Card, Anybody's Card, which is my sort of, Eric Mason was a fantastic bar magician and a magician full stop, also an artist, and he had these cards that were kind of written on, and they looked comic booky and everything, which is another passion of mine. And I used that as a structure to try and regiment the card underbox and stuff, because I could do it in bars spontaneously, but when you walk out in front of an audience for the first time and they're cold, it's a different matter. As I always say in the bits of Patty, one of the things I say, and also just to let you know, I say, the more you drink, the better this stuff looks. It gets a little laugh, and actually, there's truth in that,
It's true
because
as well.
if you've got, so.
Yeah, no, interesting about the card on the box in the bars, because I heard a story about Gordon Bruce, and he would want to be doing the trick, and move everybody to a table that was suitable for him to do the trick on, and then wait for like 45 minutes chatting about other stuff, and then go into it so he like get to the position that he needed to be, probably in the Marlborough Arms.
No, I mean, yeah, Fred Robinson said you've got to meet, there's a guy who can put a whole deck of cards under as a magician. I thought that was fascinating because that's a very interesting idea. And then I met him and we became friends, and so it was. But it's interesting, the psychology of something like that. You've got to be very careful. It's this whole thing about once people know something, it's like using a topic for every single thing you do. Very quickly they can see a pattern. It's like using culling for every single thing you do. So I'm aware of these habits that we fall into of relying on certain things. And then no matter how good you are, eventually if you look at them, you can see the pattern there. But again, it depends on the audience. For magicians, it doesn't really matter because you're paying to look at that kind of thing, and there's more analysis there. And of course, if you're working, your audiences should be changing. So it doesn't, but you're learning, but your audiences are changing. So you say, well, that's not a very good thing. And I used to use, in fact, that tactic you were talking about of not doing something instantly, which came naturally to me in getting bookings when I worked at the Magic Moment restaurant, and then people used to ask me to do dinner parties. And in the negotiations, which is always a difficult part certainly for me, but for a lot of people, it's like, how do you say, well, I'll charge this for this, And I would talk a good talk, but I purposely wouldn't do any magic. And I remember one particular couple that I went to work for, excuse me, and by the time I met them about 4 times, they were very hesitant, and then they'd agreed to it. Sorry, bit of a frog in my throat. We'll just start.
Sorry. I can chop this out.
Yeah, we'll get it in. So that teasing of because I considered them, even though this was the sort of financial negotiations, the practical logistics of doing a show, I considered that they were an audience as well, but except they had different expectations, and they didn't quite know. And I think I had 4 meetings in various times just to establish, because they wanted to book me. But by the end, and as they were leaving, and I said, maybe I should do something just to show you, because obviously I realised I haven't. And I just vanished a coin at the table for them. And they're going, well, that's the kind of thing that I do, but it has to be done at the right time. And then it just developed, and you could see the relief, and they go behind their eyes, go like the Magic Moment restaurant, they go, oh, thank God for that, he can do something. And you can stretch an audience. I mean, I don't believe just going, well, if anybody's seen me perform, it could take me as long as this podcast just to get the cards out and talk, because now it's very interesting to me that psychology of, it's not even psychology particularly, it's wrapped up in all sorts of things,
For sure. And how you can control that. Who were some dead magicians that you didn't get to see that you wished you had? Because obviously you've seen a load of legends, but who do you wish that you had seen that you missed out on?
Well, that changes. My first answer to that would be the people like Leipzig, Jacob Daly. Matt Schulian I would have really liked to see. Because I like his approach, because he was it wasn't just standing behind a bar doing stuff. He seemed like not only would he take advantage of things, he was a larger than life character, it seems to me, He's quite a big guy, so was I, so am I still, it's like you have to inhabit that personality. So I would have liked to see him. And Mo, can't remember his last name, Mo's Miracles, Estimation and stuff, the guy who wrote that book, I would have liked to have seen him work. Sometimes if people are not performers, you think to yourself, well, actually, I might have been disappointed. But certainly performers. But I would have found it very interesting. And now there are bits of footage that are either silent or look a little bit stilted to us. But then we're performing in a completely different, theatres, for example, as people much better qualified than I would say, was a completely different, uh, area, medium. There was a guy, Leipzig is an example. Here's a guy who was apparently doing close-up magic effects on a stage. Now, it's
without cameras.
It's a testament to his Mellini, but Leipzig especially. If I could pick that as an example, there is no way that people could see what he was doing,
No.
and yet his personality must have been fantastic in that kind of era of what he was doing. But I bet you, if you could get these people and sit opposite them, and if they were to show you a trick, it's like vintage wines. Certain eras have their own special things. If you could see Ramsey again, and we've seen clips of him, that there are different. You can date them almost. You can say, "Oh, that is a magician from the 1920s." Or the 19th century. You go, and they've all got their mannerisms. But I, like everybody, would have loved to have seen, from an analysis point of view, Daly, Leipzig, Mellini, these people that were the early 20th century, Paul Rossini, that I kind of, anybody that was in expert card technique. Yes, anybody from that book I would pick. And then I became good friends with Jim Cellini and the street performing, and he met a lot of people, and he said, you remind me of Jack Channing sometimes, the things you were doing. And I thought, and he seems as though, there are a lot of people, and you discover them still. David Britland is very good with his Cardopolis blog.
Yeah, fantastic.
Because he really, he'd be the first person that I'd go to if I was to ever get serious about doing something. Because before you did it, you go, can you just check for me? Or what do you think about this? Because
that's
yes, and he'd say, well, the first person to have done that, and apparently he was, and they were doing that. It was, that. And I'm thinking, I haven't got enough time in my life to get into that. The whole magic history thing is another. I used to go to the Los Angeles History Conference, and there were magicians there. Bob Reed was another great. I was lucky enough to become friends with, fantastic performer. But he used to go there, and that's where I met a lot of these American people. And the collectors market and the magic history market is, people used to flock there. I met, lots of close-up magicians who, if they were lucky enough to get an invite, could go there. And it's just this general talking shop. That's what I miss about conventions. Like the session, for example, from the social point of view, you might not see everything, but you pick up a lot of stuff,
Oh, gosh, yes.
That's... And I look forward to when we're doing that kind of thing again.
Chris, we're out of time. We always end the show with 4 quick fire questions. Are you ready?
Okay.
Favourite pizza topping?
Cheese.
Favourite movie?
2001. Stanley Kubrick. Favourite person?
It's Kubrick. Favourite person or people who make music?
Interesting one. I like heavy metal. Deep Purple were my go-to people in the early days. And now
and
still.
Finally, who would you rather fight? One massive Andy Gladwin or 100 tiny Joshua Jays?
One massive Andy Gladwin, because numbers will always overwhelm you.
Fair. As you said, referenced earlier on, that their Instagram that you're dabbling with, where can what's the name of the account there so people can keep up with it?
It's Power Chris, but the power is just PWR. I could send it to you, but
I'll put a link in the show.
I put in a link, and but basically, Gumroad is the place where at the moment I'm going to sort of put out some resources, lectures
I'm glad you
and
are.
stuff.
I'm glad you are, because in the research for this, I was trying to find some of your material, and was looking and found Laid Back 2, and found a couple of, and the only places I could find it were piracy websites selling it for $1.99. So I'm glad that you're giving people a legitimate, or will be giving people a legitimate
Yeah.
alternative to
And
those horrific
And I'll
pirates.
always, especially with this second project, I'll always try and sort of include something that's a bit novel and intrigues me, that can aim more towards the understanding of what I in particular have done, and it's just kind of watch this space in the next couple of years. I think, and I will have, I hope by the end of this year, a proper dedicated website for me and everything that I've, or a kind of a gateway for people to find out more about certain things. And that'll be the place I'll direct them to eventually. But at the moment, me and JJ, rough cut on Gumroad is it. But that's interesting in itself, just looking. A lot of people have bought that. And I said to one particular inquiry, even though we're out of time, I'll put this last one in. He said, "Oh, I really like the way you're doing it." I said, "Don't look at it again, but don't concentrate on what I'm doing or anybody. Look at the people that are watching me and see where their eyes are going and what they're doing. You'll learn a lot more about magic, actually, looking at that, because that's an interesting exercise. People like Richard Wiseman and that, are very interested in that. Peter Lamont, and it's just an intriguing subject."
On that bombshell, we're out of time. Chris Power, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, Damien.